WNST, Towson, strangely uneventful press conference on a snowy, chilly Thursday morning out at the castle in Owings Mills. Luke Jones joins us now live via satellite to recap something. And Luke, I'll just start with this, and I'll get you wound up, and I know you'll get going because you have a million thoughts on this. And I don't know that I was expecting anything. And as I said, after the game Sunday, walking downstairs, thinking, well, wow, everybody's head might roll here. And a few days later, other than Dean Pease, nobody's head's going to roll here. And once again, we talk about staying the course, having patience, where the Bengals are with Marvin Lewis, right? Miraculously in some minds. But apparently in Owings Mills and in the mind of Steve Bisciotti, that cooler heads are going to prevail here for I guess a myriad of reasons, but we are all a little – it's more shocking outside the building than it is inside the building, right?
Yeah, I think that's fair. As I said throughout the season, whenever you and I would talk about it or people throw up a question on Twitter, I'm just talking to people in my personal sphere that like the Ravens. I've said all along, I never thought that 2017 was playoffs or bust for John Harbaugh. I think it was going to be taken on a case-by-case basis as far as how things played out. But it's very clear. First of all, this felt very, very familiar. It felt very much like last year's season-ending press conference with John Harbaugh. Of course, we'll wait to hear from Steve Bisciotti and company here at some point in the not-too-distant future. But I think the ultimate debate, and I know you and I talked about this last year. I remember writing about this last year at WNST.net. You can preach all you want about continuity. At some point in time, people are going to either confuse that or accuse that of being complacency. And with the Ravens staying the course with the way they are, not making drastic changes, it'd be interesting to know if Dean Pease would have been back had he not elected to retire.
That's kind of the obvious question that'll never be answered, right, one way or another.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah, I mean, that's not something, John Harbaugh is not going to answer a hypothetical there, but I think it's fair to ask, or it's fair for fans to wonder if there's complacency here. Let's face it, John Harbaugh started off the press conference talking about how proud he was of the organization. Look, I know fans want to pound the flesh, and there's a certain mob mentality with that, but at the same time, there are reasons for fans to be upset and frustrated and to wonder what's going on, and to see that a team that not too terribly long ago appeared to be on par with, maybe not quite at New England's level, but close.
Well, we visited New England and Pittsburgh every year. We were good enough to be able to go there every year. We haven't done that in quite some time, so yes.
Yeah, so that's where fans have a right to be frustrated, and fans have a right to be asking if there is complacency here and if the Ravens are resting on their laurels and maybe a little too satisfied with what they've done in the past and thinking that, John Harbaugh even brought it up during this press conference, cited the fact that they were one play away, but we talked about that last year. And you know what? Is the standard supposed to be you're one play away from making the playoffs? Because, if we want to break this down, they were one play away from losing, beating Cincinnati. They were one play away from beating Pittsburgh. They were one play away from beating, avoiding a terrible loss to the Chicago Bears early in the season. They were another play away from beating Tennessee on the road, another game that would have put them up over the hump. So, this whole mentality that they're really, really close, I think that's troublesome to me, because I think you're just seeing the same thing happen over and over and kind of the same message. And look, I'm not saying that if I went about it, I would be firing every single person and starting it brand new. But at the same time, I see what happened. Take a look at what happened in Green Bay this week. Aaron Rodgers missed half the season, yet their general manager stepping aside. They're going to have a new offensive coordinator. I believe they let their quarterbacks coach go. They've made a lot of changes, and that's a team that went 7-9 without one of the best players in football. Now I get it. Joe Flacco was hurt this year, but Joe Flacco not being 100% for the first 6, 7, 8 weeks, whatever it was, hypothetically speaking, compared to Aaron Rodgers not being on the field at all for 8 games. I'm not saying Green Bay's right. Let me be very clear about that. They might be making they might be on the wrong end as far as an extreme. But it is interesting to see two organizations that have been on pretty similar footing. Green Bay won a Super Bowl 2 years before the Ravens last won a Super Bowl. And they've both been, over the last 15 to 20 years on pretty similar footing overall as far as team success. So it's very fascinating to see the Packers make some pretty extreme changes, whereas the Ravens, they're going to go about it again. And, if you're a fan now, talking for the last 5 years since Super Bowl 47, I think it's very, very, very fair to ask if things are going to be any different next year, really, or we're going to be talking about this same exact story next year and wondering once again whether they're going to be making wholesale changes. I think a lot of us assumed that the Ravens missed the playoffs in 2017. There was a good chance, reasonable chance, that there would be some pretty substantial changes. And at least to this point, and certainly according to John Harbaugh, not expecting too many.
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't know what the expectations really are at a press conference where the coach is saying no heads are rolling, none of the anger and the, that tightness that John has and has week to week and the paranoia and all that. It's almost like a different cat, This was sort of like the relaxed, happy bubble version of John. We're not used to seeing that in general. But I also think if he's going to stay on and coach the thing, there's only so much angst and kicking yourself that you can do. I mean, you and I are pretty familiar after the Billy Cundiff kick, him coming and sitting with us and saying you'll never get over it, But at some point they do have to go scout. They do have to make their team better. They are always sort of evaluating, and if you are going to stick around to make the team better and you are convinced that Marty Morningwig's the right guy here and maybe convinced that if you are getting fired next year, you're not going to improve your staff greatly, but it feels like Chuck Pagano could be the defensive coordinator here by Monday, right? I mean, it feels like that would be some sort of change. It feels to me like they're going to draft hard and scout hard and do all of that. And it feels like they're almost bullish on some of the edge of the roster, rookie, younger, Judon type of players to say, well, all these guys will take a step forward next year and we'll be a better football team. But I don't think John ran from the fact that we need help at wide receiver, right? Or that Ryan Jensen may leave, or that Flacco was hurt a lot early in the year and got better as the year. All of those sort of obvious things we can look at. I don't know what that means for 2018, but I know they need better football players. I know that. I don't think there's any doubt about that.
Yeah, that's stating the obvious. I mean, if he didn't acknowledge that much, then they are making the wrong choice, keeping him as their head coach, if you can't at least recognize that and concede that publicly.
But I don't know that you expect him to go out there and roll Macklin or Perryman or any other guy in a press conference setting by saying, Brashad Perryman's a bust, obviously. You know what I mean? The coach isn't going to do that, even after the season's over.
I understand that. I mean, I'm not saying he should, but, I mean, it's clear they need better. They need playmakers, but we've been saying that for 4 or 5 years now. I mean, why is this going to be different this time around? That's the question I keep coming back to. And I hear what you say about some young players on the roster. There were some guys that took a step forward. I think Matthew Judon absolutely is someone who, I don't know if he's going to be a Pro Bowler. I don't know if he's going to be, Terrell Suggs Defensive Player of the Year candidate like Suggs was. I mean, I think it'd be very lofty expectations to expect that, but
I think I got him penciled in for 12 sacks next year. I think I do. Where are you on that?
We'll see.
Okay.
What, Matt Judon? We'll see.
Okay.
We'll see. I mean, that's tough to do. 12 sacks in a season.
I think he's an emerging player, though. You know what I really liked about him specifically, and I would tell this to Harbaugh or anybody else. I walked in that locker room after that game, and that was a tough walk for me, as you know, right? Like, none of us like to see the season end. You go in there, very few of us are ever really privy to that bomb that goes off in there, right? When we get in there 15, 20 minutes after the bomb goes off, and Flacco's the first guy that comes out, and, Suggs is the last guy, and Weddle's trying to make sense of it. Matt Judon was the guy that took it the hardest to me. And, for that reason, I've been doing this 33 years. I have a feeling Matt Judon's going to emerge and be a better player in September. That's just my opinion on Matt Judon.
And I'm not saying that won't happen. I just think, to make a jump to 12 sacks, we'll see.
Okay.
I'm not confident in saying that'll happen.
I think they'll scheme him up, though. You know what I mean? I think he'll be a guy that's going to get better. Maybe 12's not being, but I don't think he's a fizzle guy. I think he's closer to being an is than a not at this point.
I'd agree with that. I think for all the concerns that they have, he's not one of them. I think he's someone you check off. I think there are a hell of a lot of concerns with this football team right now, and a lot of it does stem on the offensive side of the ball. Going back to what you said about whether it's Chuck Pagano, whether it's Errol Austin, whether they just decide to promote Wink Martindale, but you would think if they haven't done that already, you would think they're looking to bring one of these outsiders in.
That's an obvious observation, right? Like that if this were coming from within, that would have been at least done in the beginning. And I don't know how Wink feels about that or Chuck would feel about that or whatever. I know they all keep close quarters and they like to work together and whatever. But if you feel like it's your time and it's not given to you, I know how Matt Simon reacted to it 20 years ago. It wasn't good,
Sure. And that'll be something worth monitoring at least, in the immediate future when they do name their next defensive coordinator, whether it's Pagano coming back. Harbaugh did note, and I think we should mention this, at least until we see them make a hire, he made it very clear that they're looking to bring someone in who's familiar with the system, whether that's an external hire, internal hire. He said it's very clear they want someone who has ties here. That's why, someone like Jack Del Rio, that to me doesn't really make sense because Del Rio's a 4-3 guy. He hasn't been here in 15 years, 16 years. So that one wouldn't make as much sense to me, even though there are some ties. But, clearly didn't coach with Harbaugh here in Baltimore. So, we'll see about that. I don't think Dean Pease was a colossal problem other than maybe from a mindset of maybe it's time to get a new pair of eyes, some fresh blood in that spot. Sometimes a change for the sake of change can be good. As long as you hire someone that is a right person for the job and not someone who's incompetent, which I don't think they're going to do. But, my concern for this football team really isn't the defense at this point. And I'll go back to what I said last year at this time. I think this defense is good. I think certainly you'd like to see it reach another level, but I'm way more concerned about the other side of the ball, and that's where I really have my concerns as far as how they're approaching, how they're proceeding now. And I do want to say this, and I've said this at a few different points over the course of the season. In fairness to Marty Morningwig, there was a lot that worked against him, starting with the fact that they didn't really do a whole lot to help this offense in the offseason. Then you put the injuries in the equation, and specifically your quarterback, who didn't have a chance to build any kind of a rapport with Jeremy Maclin, who was a disappointment also this season. So there are plenty of issues you can point to make excuses for Marty Morningwig. At the same time, I'd be lying to you if I felt confident about moving forward with him as you're continuing to be your offensive coordinator. I know they improved late season. At the same time, this offense had 2 first downs in the first half of the game on Sunday where their season was on the line. I mean, it was horrendous. It was as bad as the offense had been probably since the London game. So I'm skeptical. And if you're going to tell me that they're going to go out and bring in playmakers, then great. But they've said that for a long time, and they still haven't done it. So I'll go back to kind of what my whole point was going into 2017 as far as why my expectations were tempered. If you're not doing anything to move the meter from a coaching standpoint, and you're not finding dynamic playmaker kind of talent to add to this offense, how are you getting better? How are you helping Joe Flacco raise his level of play? I mean, we've talked so much about that for the last 5 years now, other than the Kumbaya season. And that's where hearing the message that John Harbaugh delivered on Thursday, that's where I can understand trepidation from fans. I can understand accusations that there's complacency at work here, and the Ravens are maybe a little bit too comfortable in their methodology and their practices because, it sounds very, very similar to what we heard a year ago and what we've heard in the past. So, getting back to your point as far as what you expect the coach to say, actions are always going to speak louder than words. We understand that, but the actions here are he's not going to make any drastic changes to his offensive coaching staff. But I will point out, and I know Ian Rappaport threw this out there Thursday morning, right around when the press conference was getting going. Greg Roman's not under contract. He was only on a one-year deal, and I'll say this much. I think losing him and keeping Marty Morningwig is a very, very concerning sequence of events for the Ravens, because the one thing you could point to throughout the season that improved on the offensive side of the ball was what? The running game. The running game in 2015 under Mark Trestman and 2016 under Trestman and then Marty Morningwig was, one, not productive, two, there wasn't a commitment there. So that's something that really concerns me, almost as much as, the idea that they need to bring in some receivers, they need to bring in a tight end. So, that's the part of this equation that isn't to be, hasn't been determined just yet, but I don't like the idea of losing Greg Roman and then saying, well, Marty Morningwig's just going to try to copy what Greg Roman did, because I think the Ravens were down that road with Mark Trestman following Gary Kubiak, and we saw how that turned out. So I think that's easier said than done, and that would be a big loss. And, is it a possibility that they could have said, we'll promote Greg Roman to offensive coordinator and maybe hire a quarterbacks coach? I don't know if that was ever on the table. I don't know if that was ever a consideration. But, I think I'd be more inclined to like that combination a little more than keeping Marty Morningwig and losing Greg Roman. But we'll see how that plays out here in the coming days and weeks.
Well, there's always the notion that when you take a job and you're moving your family, no matter who it is, you're either thinking, well, this is a 9-month assignment or an 11-month assignment, or you're thinking like, I'm really going to be there 3 or 4 years. I mean, I'm friends with too many of these guys, too many of the Mike Nolans and the Jim Schwartzes that have pelts, and their families have gear, right? From the Ravens, the Titans, the Lions, the Bills, the Eagles, right? If you're Mike Nolan, he must be on his 9th or 10th team now, and he's got the New Orleans Saints and might get himself a ring, 6 weeks from now, right? So, these guys move around, but there is this whole notion of, if you're Greg Roman, taking a gig with, let's say, Gruden, right? He looks like he's going to be there 3 or 4 years because he's taking that kind of a deal. So you have something to sell there that probably John doesn't have right now, which is stability. That is something maybe Mike Tomlin does have to sell right now. And, I guess Jacksonville would have that to sell right now, and a handful of other places. Philadelphia would have that to sell, that I'm gonna have this job for a little while. But there aren't a whole lot of places where you have that going on, and there's going to be 8 or 10 places by the end of the week or end of next week where, Tennessee might fire their coach if they lose this week. Andy Reid might be done this week. Who knows, right? So there's still more in the pipeline here, but it is a really weird job fair, this coaches moving. And I will say this, Harbaugh having a press conference on the Thursday after the game. Bisciotti's going to have his turn. You and I will be gathered in Indianapolis, 6-7 weeks from now at the Combine. I wonder what we're talking about at the Combine versus what we're talking about now, and how much of that's going to wind up shaking out in regard to coaches, in regard to assistants, in regard to head coaches in other places, and who's going to go where, and maybe even philosophically where this team is sort of headed, because right now this sort of holding pattern, this isn't going to work to sell tickets. I know that much, and and maybe that's not Steve's deal here, but I also know blowing it up and having the team go 4-12 next year, and eating Flacco's contract and saying enough with Suggs, and I'm making that up. I just don't think they're ever going to turn their back and say we're going to rebuild or start from scratch. And I don't know that 8 years from now Eric DeCosta's not running this organization, because it feels to me like the boat's a little wayward right now, and unlike the Billick thing, which felt a little itchy to me, at the time, I think it felt itchy to a lot of people at the time, coming off of a 13-3 and not having a quarterback and, all the other stuff that happened to Billick. But that was more of a vibe, mojo in the building thing. Look, Harbaugh's got 1 year left on his deal, even if he has 2, even if he had 5, because I don't know that they can sustain this, but this franchise is in choppy water right now, and I think from Bisciotti down, the only thing they're thinking about, Luke, is how can we win 10 games next year? How can next year, can we be the 5 or the 6 so that we're at least playing a football game this time next year? Not necessarily how do we get to the Super Bowl, because the only way to get to the Super Bowl is to be playing this week, right? That's the only chance you have. But I would say this, the retreat part of this that maybe some fans wanted from Bisciotti, which would be, Ozzie, you're fired. John, you're fired. I'm going to go find another genius. Eric, you're my genius. Go find me a new young coach genius. Let's draft a quarterback. We'll play through with Joe. We'll Alex Smith him. We'll draft a Mahomes kind of guy, or we'll make a dramatic move to go get one of these kids that we like in the draft, and we'll move the boat completely. But knowing that we're going to move the boat might look like 6-10 next year. It might look like 5-11 next year. But at least we're doing the Houston Astros thing. I don't know that Steve's got the belly for that. I don't know that Ozzie wants to walk away on a 4th and 12. Clearly, they didn't throw John out the side door and had every opportunity to do that here at this point, or demand that if Marty doesn't go, John goes too. I mean, Steve can do whatever he wants to do. So the fact that we're sitting here wild card weekend and Ozzie's got his job, Eric's got his job, John's got his job, Marty. The fact that all of that is there, that means that Steve signed off on all this, right? Because if there was going to be a knee jerk, that would have happened 72 hours ago, I think.
Yeah, and I think you could absolutely speculate that's one reason why John Harbaugh didn't talk until Thursday. He could have done this Monday. He could have done this Tuesday. It didn't happen until Thursday.
Well, maybe John needs to get in a room with Steve and say, hey, Steve, dude, if you don't want me here anymore, I'll go take the Lions job or the car. I mean, I'm gone. I think that's a very real relationship thing, right? I mean, you don't want to be here anymore. This is the time where I can go get another job, and this is the time where you can go get the coach you want moving forward. So clearly there's a kumbaya at the top here, right? That they're all licking the same wounds and they all still want to be married, literally, right? I mean, because they have that choice at any point. This would have been that time. So for that, that's not a bad thing for an organization to stick together in any other line of work. But it's sports. 3 years you don't make the playoffs. You lose on 4th and 12 and the ball goes over your head. Everybody goes out the door. I mean, that's what fans sort of want, that blood, I think, Yeah,
and I think that's fair. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but at the same time, fans, media, anyone can ask the very fair question. Why is next year going to be different? We've seen this now for the last 5 years. And the 1 year that they did make it, and look, I'm giving them credit. They won a playoff game. They had two different 14-point leads over New England in the 2014 postseason. But keep in mind, they needed Andy Reid and the Chiefs to win just for them to get in Week 17. Can you imagine now just going back and thinking about that? Had that not happened? So my point is, it's great to have continuity, and it's great to have people that want to be there, and that's true, and that's what they're exercising yet again here, but then how are things going to be different next year? You're not changing up your coaching staff other than your defensive coordinator, and look, I think Pagano or whoever they bring in can certainly be an asset, but there's not a whole lot higher the defense can go, unless you really think they are going to become the reincarnated 2000 Ravens, which I've never thought that. That's why I've really not liked the approach of how they've tried to build a roster since Super Bowl 47. But, my point is, it's great to talk about continuity, but then how are you moving the meter? Because the standard that you're setting here over the last 5 years isn't all that great. Now, it's not terrible. It's not the Cleveland Browns, but I think, and someone tossed out this comparison, and I thought it was actually, I thought it was a cogent thing to say, whether you agree or disagree, is, the idea used to be that you're competing with the Steelers, but, this feels a little bit more, at least how they're proceeding, it's a little more like the Bengals recently. Now, 2008 through 2012, no question, the Ravens, much more success, but if you're going back on a 5-year timeline here, it's a little more, it reminds you a little more of the Bengals, keeping Marvin Lewis. So, again, not saying that you had to blow everything up, but...
Well, the blow everything up model doesn't work in sports, and I can hear that in Bisciotti's voice, Come in and blow everything up. I might guess wrong. I got a coach that won a Super Bowl. I got executives here that won a Super Bowl. They know what they're doing, so therefore I'm going to let them do what they do instead of blowing it up. I think that there's... Look, Peyton, right? Sean Payton is online to maybe win another Super Bowl in 6 weeks, right? And he's been thrown out 5 times. He's the village idiot. He's the highest paid coach. He's apparently a legendary prick, on top of everything else. And he's been caught cheating and, all this stuff, right? Had some off the field issues, all of that. And he survived, right? Like the cockroach, right? The first time Mike Tomlin hit choppy water, there was some thought to throw him out. Belichick has survived a murderer, 2 scandals by winning, right? So and he's got a quarterback, right? So that sort of trumps everything. I don't know what the right answer is, and certainly not for the Cincinnati Bengals or for the Ravens at this point. But I do know that there's some comfort level with knowing you don't have a guy sniffing cocaine on video like the Dolphins did, right? Like, you've got people in your building who you're comfortable with them, they're comfortable with you, and sometimes, maybe to your point, maybe a little too comfortable, but there's also I'm not in the mood to blow this thing up right now and retreat and go say I had it wrong and we're going to go 4-12 next year, because I don't know that Bisciotti can afford that right now. So there is that fine line, and I pay big money to be that little fly inside the wall in his brain right now to wonder exactly what he's thinking. But throwing everybody over the side of the boat, as much as I thought that emotionally on Sunday, once Monday comes and that didn't happen, because I saw how quickly it happened with Brian the last time, right? And then we get to Thursday, and there's a very calm version of John Harbaugh that I think, quite frankly, it's unusual for us to see that sort of version of John, right?
Yeah, it is. Could there have been a little more of an edge to what he had to say? That might have helped.
I found him to be very zen, quite frankly.
Yeah, definitely. But at the same time, when you start off saying how proud you are of your team, and look, I like the fact that the guy feels that way, but I'm not sure that's the best tone for your fan base, starting off your press conference. I really don't. Some of...
are you acting, or are you just telling me what's really going on? I felt like John had no act at all going on Thursday, where a lot of the time I feel like there's a lot of theatrics with it, to be honest.
There's a ton of acting at a press conference. I don't think we were hearing John being 100% honest. I wouldn't expect him to either. I'm not being critical, but, there's... Again, we're breaking down a press conference. And words mean very, very little. I'll continue, but I'll go back to what I said as far as you want to keep everything together. That's fine. Then what's changing? Are we just going to be talking about another 8-8, 9-7 football team next year? Because if you're going to ask me if I'm going to predict that now, not knowing what's going to happen, I'm guessing that's going to happen again. Because I don't trust this organization to build an offense adequately. Because they haven't done it in a really long time. And I think they've wasted Joe Flacco over the last 5 years, even with all of his imperfections and guys like me criticizing him at times. I think it's been an absolute befuddling approach to roster building since Super Bowl 47. So if you're not changing up your coaching staff, and if we assume they're going to proceed the way that they have in the past with the way they build their roster, then I don't know what's going to be different next year. I just don't. So from that standpoint, I think it's, I completely understand fans being concerned and thinking that, there's complacency at work here and being a little too comfortable. It'll be up to them to prove guys like me wrong. It'll be up to them to show the fans that they are committed to building a really good offense, because, I haven't seen that for most of the last 5 years, starting with the decision to get rid of Anquan Bolden for nothing. So, we'll see how it plays out. But, again, I'll go back to what I've said about this offense. I haven't found the coaching to be overly innovative. I think Greg Roman was a great addition. Will they keep him? Can they keep him? Who knows? If they lose him, I feel way worse about the coaching side of things, because, I'm not a big Marty Morningwig guy, even though I've acknowledged that he had a lot working against them this year. So, will they hire a quarterback's coach? John Harbaugh didn't rule it out, but he said the same thing last year, and they never did. So, then we move forward, and this is the question for Ozzie Newsome and Eric DaCosta and whoever else, whoever's running things, whoever's scouting everything. Whether they make some changes or not, we don't know that at this point. But what are you going to do to find some playmakers? We've talked about offensive playmakers for years, and they haven't found them. You know, Alex Collins was a nice addition, but do I think he's the next Ray Rice? No. I think he's a good running back. I think they have a good running game, but is he a guy that's an over-the-top difference maker? They need to find one or two of those guys, and they need to find it fast because as much as you can talk about not making changes just because your fan base wants a pound of flesh, I agree with that, by the way. At the same time, this fan base is completely justified to have some concerns and to wonder if everyone's just a little too satisfied with what the Ravens used to be rather than what they've been the last 4 or 5 years.
All right, man, I'm going to break it off, man. You start to hurt my feelings when you start saying we're breaking down the demeanor of a postseason press conference of a 9-7 team, you know? So, well, yes, we can only do so much of that, right? We can only...
Yeah, ultimately, and we say this all the time, actions are going to speak louder than words.
Well, the actions are we're sitting around this weekend watching Jacksonville and Buffalo play, and they're not playing. So, like, that's just a fact, and that speaks for itself all weekend long, right? Literally.
It really does, and that's where John Harbaugh can be as proud of his staff and his players as he wants. And look, it is a good group of guys. I agree with that. At the same time, the object of the game isn't to be good guys and to work hard and to have good spirit and to love football. It's to win football games. Now, you can all those other traits can go into it, but at the end of the day, you need to have enough good to great football players to put yourself over the hump. And, I've said this I remember vividly saying this to you last Christmas night after the Ravens were knocked out. And I said at the time, the biggest difference between the Baltimore Ravens and the Pittsburgh Steelers right now are Antonio Brown and Le'Veon Bell. And, look, I'll say it again over and over. I know it's not easy to find those guys, but we're going on 4 or 5 years now, and Ray Rice has been gone for a long time now. Anquan Bolden.
Well, the wide receivers haven't sucked here because of Flacco either. So, like every time I hear some idiot fan yelling about Flacco, I'm like, Flacco's never had a Brown or a Gordon or a Bryant or AJ Green. Name any of those cats. I mean, even Peyton Manning with Marvin Harrison or give me a guy, right? I mean, he's never had that guy. And if Torrey Smith had been that guy, the Ravens would have given him $8 million. They would have given him 12 if he'd have been that guy. Because he wasn't that guy, they weren't going to give him 8. So that's really the rub in all of this is we'll look back on Flacco and say, where was his special receiver? Where was his special running back? And I think Ray Rice was a special running back for 10 minutes, and I think Dennis Pitta was a special tight end for 10 minutes, right? But other than that, dude spent a generation here now being a quarterback and has not had his DeAndre Hopkins, has not had his, name any of these franchises you want. They had Johnson before that in Houston.
Yeah, and look, it doesn't have to be the best receiver in football, but you got to give him someone. I mean, it's.
But I'm going through every franchise here. Megatron. I mean, we just, not to mention Terrell Owens and the Randy Moss types at the end of their career.
Sure.
But Bolden will be the best wide receiver he's ever worked with, I guess, on reputation, right, through his career.
Yeah, Anquan Bolden. Steve Smith was at the very end of his career. Bolden was on the tail end of his prime when he came to Baltimore.
And Bolden's not going to the Hall of Fame, but Steve Smith is, so, right?
Sure. Well, I mean, I think there's some debate there as far as both those guys.
We'll do that in Minnesota in a couple of weeks. We'll see that later. Yeah.
Derek Mason was very, very important for Joe Flacco his first couple seasons. But I think, and to be very clear, because some of the names you mentioned, there are lots of examples of teams that had an unbelievable best receiver in the NFL that they paid a lot of money to, and those teams didn't win Super Bowls. Megatron never won a Super Bowl. But that said, you've got to be way better than what the Ravens have been over the last 4 or 5 years collectively at the wide receiver position. I mean, that's just, you have to. And I'm so sick of hearing people that want to make excuses and say, well, they're not good at drafting. Well, you know what? Do something to change that. We say the same thing about the Orioles with starting pitching. Do something to change that narrative, whether it's finding the right scout, the right person who has is considered a wide receiver guru, from a scouting and evaluation standpoint, whatever it is, change that. It's such a self-defeatist attitude to say, well, I don't really want the Ravens to draft a wide receiver because they're not good at doing it. Change that narrative. Change that same old.
Well, they have to draft a wide receiver. They don't have any choice.
Right. I mean, and that's going to be really interesting. By the way, I think I touched on it with you when we were kind of doing our post-game residue at the beginning of the week. But Mike Wallace is going to be a free agent. I think Mike Wallace is not a number one wide receiver. I totally would agree with that. I think that's kind of an obvious statement. At the same time, he had a 1,000-yard season last year. The way he played after the bye put him on pace for over 1,000 yards again. The whole passing game was an utter disaster before the bye. We know that. Everything about it stunk. But he played much better down the stretch. And more than anything, it's kind of the Torrey Smith argument again. It's great to say you don't want to pay him, and I'm not saying I'd give Mike Wallace a lucrative deal by any stretch. At the same time, there's one receiver on this roster now that I actually feel confident will be on the 2018 team, and that's Chris Moore. I'm really skeptical that Jeremy Maclin will be back. In fact, I'm not so sure he's going to continue to play football. Part of me wonders if this guy is ready to hang it up. I don't know. I mean, I haven't heard from him since he got hurt, but I'm skeptical about him. Certainly, you can't count on Brashad Perriman for anything. I'm not even sure he's going to make this team next year. So, Quincy Adeboyejo is developmental. I'm certainly not penciling him in to be anything meaningful, even to be on the roster guaranteed. So, when Chris Moore is your only sure thing as far as receivers that are going to be on the team, and at best, he's a guy should be a guy competing for number 3 at best, you've got a heck of a lot of work to do. So, if you let Wallace go, well, then you're going to be looking at needing to add at least 2, if not 3, impactful wide receivers, guys that can actually help you. Not talking, just taking a flyer on some other team's failed draft pick from 3 years ago. So it's a lot of work to do at that position. So that's where I think Mike Wallace is interesting. I think Ryan Jensen's a really interesting free agent. I'd hate to see the Ravens lose him, and then they're back at a position they were this past year, not knowing who their starting center is going to be.
He's going to get paid, too. We all know that.
Yeah, I mean, he's going to get real money. I don't know where that's going to fall. I mean, this isn't a guy who started for 3 years. This isn't Rick Wagner, who was a 3-year starter and really gained some notoriety, as much notoriety as a right tackle can get. Jensen did this for 1 year. He looked pretty darn good. I think you'd really like to keep him. I'm not going to make him the highest paid center in football, and I'm skeptical that anyone else is going to, but it's going to be really interesting to see what kind of market is there for him. And I'm with you from a standpoint of you're not going to get him on a 2-year, $4 million deal. You're going to have to give him real money here. And we'll see if the Ravens, 1, have the means, 2, are willing to do that. And so, not only talking about needing to add to this offense, there's a couple, there aren't many key free agents for this team this offseason, but a couple of them are on the offensive side of the ball, and I think there's some very important and potentially unsettling decisions to be made there.
Lots of stuff dangling. He is Baltimore Luke out on Twitter, as well as Luke at WNST.net. Luke Jones, our man on the scene in Owings Mills, and Owings Mills will be they'll be turning the lights off over there as they continue to remodel the north wing of the castle out in Owings Mills. You can find me out in the buyatoyota.com audio vault. You can also find the John Harbaugh season-ending press conference in the buyatoyota.com audio vault. You can download the TuneIn Radio app and listen live from anywhere in the world. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live on our Facebook as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.